Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, I'm going to react to It Begins. New York City starts blocking migrant buses. Now, if that's really what's happening, that is actually quite incredible. Like, I was in New York about 2 months ago, something like that. And one thing that did shock me was the amount of homeless people I saw. They were everywhere. In the street, obviously, on the train platforms, on the trains, in the train stations, under bridges, like everywhere. Like they were everywhere. And, we're talking Manhattan, the Bronx, throughout New York. London has homeless people. And I will say the numbers have increased also, but I will say probably I saw maybe twice, at least 2 times the amount in New York. And it shocked me because New York is such a rich city. There's so much wealth in that city. The amount of money generated through property taxes, I think, is like 100 billion a year. So I thought, why aren't they building more shelters? But then somebody told me that it's because a lot of these shelters are full of immigrants, refugees as well, allegedly. I don't know if this is true or not. So maybe so obviously if there's no beds for homeless people, then where are they going to stay? So I wonder who is blocking these buses. Is it people who want those shelters to be used for people, that have citizenship, that have problems? Is it people who are anti-immigration, anti-refugee? It's going to answer a lot of questions, this video.
Mayor Eric Adams is pushing back against Texas Governor Greg Abbott's efforts sending tens of thousands of migrants to New York City. Adams is putting in place new restrictions on the companies that operate the buses carrying asylum seekers, and violations could mean charges.
Interesting plan, but will it work? Or is it too little, too late?
6 additional buses arrived at the Port Authority bus terminal overnight, hours after Mayor Adams issued a new executive order requiring 32-hour notice.
This comes after 14 buses arrived from Texas in just one night.
So that we can be prepared, so that when the migrants...
14 buses, assuming each person, each bus has 2 rows, right, of 2 seats. Let's say 15 rows potentially. So that's 16 people per bus. 14 buses, that's 1,000 people in one night. It's a lot.
Arrive to New York City, we can get them to where they need to get to safely.
Fines and even criminal charges could be the consequences, according to the city.
You are allowed to drop off migrants in the city, but you're going to do it at the location that we specify so we don't overtax our resources, our manpower.
Over 150,000 asylum seekers.
Here we are at the Port Authority bus terminal in New York City, where recently 14 buses arrived on a single day carrying asylum seekers from the U.S. southern border. Now, each of these buses can seat between 50 and 60 people, which means...
Wow, I was bang on with my estimation.
15 of them can carry around 750 people, who all arrived on the exact same day. On top of that, over 150,000 asylum seekers have already come through the city since this humanitarian crisis began, completely filling the city's emergency shelters. And because of that, New York City's mayor has decided to take drastic action to limit the number of buses that can come to the city every single day.
Mayor Eric Adams announcing an executive order. First, it will require that charter buses transporting migrants give New York City at least 32 hours advance notice. 2, it will require that these charter buses arrive only between 8:30 a.m. and 12 p.m.
So now the way it works is buses from the southern border can only pull into this designated drop-off spot during a 4-hour window 5 days a week. And bus companies who disobey...
These migrants, where are they coming from? That's a key question. Where are they coming from? Are they coming from Mexico? Because it sounds like it, considering they're coming from the southern border. Are they coming from the Middle East? Are they coming from Ukraine? Where are they coming from?
This executive order in New York could face fines, the buses could be impounded, and people could potentially even be arrested. And although this might limit the number of buses that come to the city every single day, New York City is still the #1 destination for folks seeking asylum, and that has to do with the city's unique right to shelter rules that guarantee temporary room and board to anyone who asks. Now, bus companies faced with these restrictions in Chicago are just bringing their passengers to suburbs outside of the city. And from the suburbs, they can take a train or a ride share to get into the city itself. itself. And while New York City may only have this one particular bus terminal, it's also got 2 airports and 2 train stations, so there are other ways for people to get here using mass transit. And this has the city's leaders very worried, because if someone wants to come to New York City, they still can. And with the asylum crisis estimated to cost the city $12 billion over the next 3 years, it could mean that this executive order does little to impact New York City's overall predicament, which is why the mayor recently told New Yorkers that the best way to solve this crisis is to take matters into their own hands.
Man, this is such a complicated issue. This is such a complex problem because on the one hand, the infrastructure is only built to, sustain a certain population, a certain amount of people. So if you put too many people, relying on that infrastructure, the infrastructure will fail. But on the other hand, a lot of these migrants will eventually work jobs that a lot of the original residents of New York City don't want to do. And those jobs need to be done by somebody. So, and, a lot of those migrants will then go on to pay taxes. So it's like, how do you balance it? Like, hello, Mr. Pigeon.
So things are at a point now where the mayor is asking New Yorkers to ask the federal government for continued assistance with this crisis. And this is because the city is completely out of resources, which is forcing the city to make tough choices which could impact daily life for many of its residents. Specifically, the city is now cutting funding for the fire department, the police department, schools, and they're even gonna fire the workers who take care of the city's parks.
What, to fund the migrant situation? Or is it just because of mismanagement? It's probably a bit of both, isn't it?
Many New Yorkers are completely upset with the idea of these cuts, but since the city is completely out of room and out of money, there aren't a whole lot of good options left at this point.
The shelter at the Floyd Bennett Field, which can house up to 2,000 migrants and was only opened about a month ago, is already housing around 1,400 people.
Now, this particular shelter made national news a month ago when the people who were brought there refused to stay. And that's because it's a former military airfield outfitted with humanitarian-style relief tents. And apparently bathrooms are in a separate building from where the dormitories are. On top of that, the airfield is prone to flooding, which could make it dangerous as temperatures in New York continue to drop. And for that reason, the mayor is now calling on New Yorkers to ask their federal elected officials for help. But that's got many Americans scratching their heads, because the reason the asylum crisis has reached such proportions here in New York is because of New York's unique right to shelter rules. For example, the city has laws going back to the 80s that guarantee temporary shelter to anyone who asks for it. These laws are unique to New York City and to many Americans, including those running the federal government in Washington. This situation could be one of New York City's own making, which explains why, even though the mayor's been to D.C. 10 times recently, the federal government isn't completely sold yet on the idea of having the rest of the country support a city that they don't necessarily live in, nor can vote in, or have any effect on how the place is run.
The only way you can really deal with a massive influx of illegal immigrants is for the original countries where they're coming from to be made desirable to stay. Like, if you can make it so that the quality of life there is good, people won't want to leave. Like, people typically don't want to leave their home country unless they have to, right? I don't know, like maybe investing in these countries, trying to build up their infrastructure, maybe that could work. I don't know. Like, I do think, a lot of illegal immigration has been caused by, interfering in domestic affairs, which has to stop. Like, this whole situation with Yemen, I'm not sure exactly what the reason why, the UK and the American Air Force had to start bombing Yemen. But why, could escalate again into what we saw, in 2002 with Iraq and Afghanistan. This could blow up into a massive, lengthy war again. Like, why are we going to Yemen? Why are we bombing Yemen?
Runs out of room to house migrants. They've also been continuing their push with the state to lift the right to shelter mandate, which requires that the city provide shelter to anyone who needs it.
And this is why the rest of the country is somewhat reluctant to continue bailing out the city. New York's right to shelter mandate goes back to the 1980s when the state Supreme Court ordered the city to provide shelter. And to many Americans, if this issue were really as big a deal as the mayor and other elected officials are making it out to be, they would do something to amend the process for how the city handles situations like this. And And critics say that the city's present condition, good or bad, is the result of what New Yorkers vote for. In fact, many leaders in the city are in favor of maintaining right to shelter because it keeps families with nothing from having to live on the street. But the problem is right to shelter is very expensive, which is why the city has to make controversial cuts to education and police. But the mayor says the city wouldn't have to make these cuts if its wealthiest residents would just give it more money. And some people think comments like this are the first step towards raising taxes, because if rich New Yorkers won't voluntarily turn over more of their money, the city can come up with new taxes and fees to get more money that way. And that might...
I don't think they'll raise taxes in an election year. They won't do that. They won't do that. I think what they should do is tax the top 1% more. You know, people like Bezos, like companies like Amazon, who are paying 0.05% tax, that they're using every loophole they can find to evade paying tax. Go tax those guys. Like, don't tax the middle class. The middle class, there is no middle class anymore, like in the UK pretty much. Like, everybody here is strapped for cash. It's probably the same thing in America. Like, you can't raise taxes again.
Crazy until you consider just how deep the city's latest cuts have had to go, and how they could end up doing more harm than good.
I don't know what the solution is really. It's a really complicated problem.
It was a stark reminder that the budget cuts Mayor Adams has ordered to help pay for the migrant crisis are very, very, very unpopular.
So none of the cuts that the mayor wants to make are popular at all, especially those to police, who are dealing with increased robberies and assaults, cuts to the fire department, who recently rescued New Yorkers from a collapsing apartment building, and very controversially, cuts to New York City's understaffed public schools, which critics say will only hurt kids. And the problem for New York City is that without funding from another source, these cuts are going to have to happen. And people are concerned the city could literally turn into a complete dump as the sanitation department stops emptying roadside trash bins, like these right here, which means even more trash than normal will start piling up along New York City's streets. But the thing that's got a lot of New Yorkers upset is that the city claims it doesn't have the money, therefore it has to make these cuts. But some people say that might not be true. The city is actually owed $2.1 billion in uncollected fees and violations, which if collected could be very helpful for funding things like schools and police and libraries and the fire department and the
I really would love someone to audit New York City's budget, their annual budget. I just don't, like, dollar for dollar, where is the money going? Because I'm sorry, if you're generating such huge amounts of money in just property tax alone, how are you running out of money? Where is it going? How much money is actually going where it should be? And how much is going in terms of brown envelopes and bribes and corruption? I find it so hard to believe New York City is running out of money. Like,
100 Parks Department employees who are about to lose their jobs.
More than 1,000 New Yorkers who help to keep our city parks clean are expected to lose their jobs. This is one of many impacts of budget cuts announced last month.
So New York City's parks are world-renowned. We've got Bryant Park, Central Park, the Highline Park, even Times Square qualifies as a park. And although these parks are great now, that might not be the case if these cuts end up going through. And 1,400 of the people that work at parks like this and take care of them end up losing their jobs on account of the city's asylum crisis. Also, greenery and trees are such a rare commodity here in the city that a lot of people find it unacceptable for all of this to go to waste because the city just stops taking care of it. And on top of that, the folks who empty these trash bins and keep these walkways clear are some of the city's neediest. And they're the ones who are going to end up losing their jobs.
It's crazy. So they'll cut the people who are probably making, you know, between 10 and 15 bucks an hour. But I'm sure there's lots of middle managers who are working for the district, you know, just pushing pencils, who probably could get cut. Like, and you probably wouldn't have to cut as many of those people as the people who are maintaining the parks. You know,
New York City's Parks Department could result in a filthy city and a loss of over 1,400 jobs, including the agency's Parks Opportunity Program.
So at issue here is the Parks Opportunity Program, which offers training to New Yorkers looking to build their skills and climb the city's economic ladder. Specifically, the program employs New Yorkers at a rate of $15.45 an hour to clean and maintain the parks. For 40 hours a week too, which means for many to clean and maintain employs New Yorkers at a rate of $15.45 an hour to clean and maintain the parks. For 40 hours a week, too, which means for many people, this was a full-time source of employment, and likely the only source of employment they could get, because many of the people in this program don't have a high school diploma yet. Plus, this program offers education that can help those get a high school equivalency degree, and since studies show that not having a high school diploma can set people back for their entire lives, this program was doing a lot of good for the people who needed it the most. The program also offers other types of training for people who might want to be security guards or work in food preparation. Basically, it's a program that was helping people get out of poverty while keeping the parks clean at the exact same time.
You're going to see more trash in parks. Bathrooms, if they are open at all, are going to be places you're not going to want to be.
Honestly, that sounds terrible, and these cuts aren't going to improve anything for anybody in the city. And critics of making cuts to this particular parks program point out that $15.45 an hour is $124 after 8 hours of work. And the city's shelters spend $400 a day taking care of people, which is cheaper to pay people $124 a day to take care of the parks or to give them a place to live and no job for $400 a day. It doesn't make any sense. Plus, the people cleaning the parks are going to move on to better things after they get the training. And just look at how much benefit this particular park, Bryant.
And if you sack all these people who are cleaning these parks, some of them may not be able to get jobs immediately, so they're going to have to go on government assistance, which is going to cost probably just as much money.
Is for the city. There's all these little shops and businesses. It's a major tourist attraction, and the apartments across the street from the park end up costing a whole lot more than they would if this park were a dump. Plus, tourists who want to come to New York and maybe visit a park like this, they spend $50 billion a year, support 9% of the city's workforce, and add $6 billion a year to the city's piggy bank from taxes. And we're going to jeopardize all of that because we don't want to pay people $15 an hour. That's... Not everybody agrees with that. On top of that, the city's parks department manages 14% of the landmass in New York City, which used to get cleaned multiple times a week, but now may only get cleaned one time a week. But even though there isn't as much opposition to these particular cuts as there are to others, the city's education department is actually in court right now suing because the cuts to education might in fact be illegal.
They'll do anything but tax the wealthy properly. They'll do anything. They'll cut education. They'll cut, park maintenance. They'll cut police rather than go and cut, Jeff Bezos, who made 20 billion last year or whatever. It's just insane. It's insane.
So here we are at New York City's flagship public library on 42nd Street, which is no longer open on Sundays because of recent cuts. And in addition to making cuts to the library, the city is also making cuts to schools. But teachers are fighting back.
The lawsuit alleges that Adams violated a state law which prevents the city from cutting education spending unless overall revenues decline.
So the city's teachers are in court right now suing because of the cuts, which the city has to make because unfortunately there's no money left. And the New York City public school system has one of the largest education budgets in the entire country. The current school year is going to cost $37.5 billion, but only 41% of that, or around $15 billion, is spent on actual classroom instruction, which means there's likely to be some savings found in that other 59% of the budget that doesn't go towards teaching kids in classrooms.
Where does that go? Where does the rest go?
To court documents, the city collected $8 billion more in revenue last fiscal year than projected.
We have an historic reserves in the city of New York.
So the reason these cuts might not actually be legal is because the city's tax revenue has actually gone up. Also, these cuts are going to be pretty tough because if you look at this chart, 41% of the city's money goes to non-negotiable mandated payments, like employee benefits and pensions, which could mean that the only areas that can be cut are those that affect kids directly. School lunches, classroom learning materials, and the sad reality is that the school's massive budget probably can't be cut as much as anyone thinks, which is why emergency services like the police and the fire department continue to experience cuts, even though their budgets are very small in comparison.
I don't know. This just seems there's probably so much money that's falling through the cracks unaccounted for. How can the budget for education be 37 billion, but only 15 billion goes towards direct classroom-based teaching? So pays for the teachers, the equipment they use, stationery, etc. Where does the rest go? Show me the accounts. Show me the Excel spreadsheet that breaks down where the money goes. I'd love to see that.
Here we are at a police station, and even though the police and the fire department and other emergency services have smaller budgets than the education department, they're continuing to be cut. And this past year, the city spent $5.8 billion on police and only $2.7 billion on the fire department, which is about what the city spends on the pensions for those in the education department. And not only is the city cutting things like overtime pay and staffing, new local rules are complicating matters by changing the way police do their jobs.
The other bill before City Council is called How Many Stops? It would require cops to record level 1, 2, and 3 stops. Sponsors of the bill say a cop would not have to record public interactions if, say, a tourist was to ask for directions.
So what's interesting about this bill is that although it may help spot unfair police practices, it comes at a time when police are already stretched to the bare minimum. And the law would require that police fill out reports every time they stop anyone in an official capacity. Now, a tourist who needs directions in Times Square, that's not a formal stop. But if the police suspect you of doing something and they stop you, they're then going to have to fill out one of these reports.
Every minute and every second counts when you get to that job. So we're going to have our officers sit there and do reports. It makes no sense.
Now, proponents of this bill say that it's not all bad for the police because it could exonerate them when they're accused of unfair policing practices. And if the police stop someone for something on the streets of New York, the reasons for the stop are going to be recorded, which creates a paper trail of information concerning why the stop took place. But extra work is going to take time, and when there's an emergency situation, the police don't have a whole lot of time.
Something confusing about that last bill. For a level 1 stop, a person technically doesn't have to stay to give their information. That cop will then have to use their perception to guess a person's race, ethnicity, and age.
So if officers have to guess a person's information, critics say it might not end up being all that accurate or all that useful. And although the idea is well-intentioned, is this the right time to try something out which takes the police time and gives them less opportunity to stop crime? And because the city's managing a humanitarian crisis, we're about to have the lowest level of police by 2025 because police graduation classes, those are being canceled as well, which means new officers aren't coming into the force and veteran officers are retiring.
Right.
If current police retire and you aren't training new police, when new police eventually do come in, the veterans needed to mentor them and help them rise through the ranks and make a career out of being a cop in New York won't be there. And critics say policies like this could set the force back years, which is why the mayor and city leaders want more help managing.
And you can bet that crime will continue to rise unless people feel, because wherever there's poverty, crime rises. So if you've got less officers to combat that, you're just going to have mayhem.
Humanitarian crisis that's taking place here right now, but should they get it? And do you think limiting the number of buses that come to New York is going to change how many people decide to come here and seek asylum? Let me know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the...
Oh my God. Like, yeah, super interesting video. I think ultimately it's interesting. Like my heart goes out to, you know, refugees, migrants, you know, it really does, because they didn't want to leave their homes. But I do think that the citizens of a country should get priority. Like, you know, if you've got such a bad homeless situation and the homeless are actual citizens, why not house them first? Do you know what I mean? Like, because a lot of homeless people at some point paid taxes. They may have fallen on hard times. You know, a lot of homeless people, a lot of homeless men are, you know, there because of divorce, believe it or not. It seems strange that it's the migrants who are getting the beds first, even though I think it's coming from a good place, compassion, that, you know, that this policy is in place. I think ultimately, bigger picture wise, you know, the big countries, the wealthy countries like the UK, the US, a lot of the European countries, we just have to, A, stop interfering in other countries' domestic affairs, like in terms of military interventions. B, try and, it's going to take investment. Invest in these countries to try and make the countries basically nice enough that people won't want to migrate. Like, even though we do need migration, because without migration, you're relying on population growth, domestic population growth for the population to grow. And we need population growth because that's how a capitalist system survives. You constantly need new people paying taxes, buying products for the system to work. So it's a really, really complicated issue. But Yeah, another thing is I just don't know how New York City is balancing its budget. I would love to have a good look at where the budget goes because, you know, the education budget thing alone really rubbed me the wrong way. Where is that? Where is the other half of the money going? Like 37 billion, only 15 billion is going towards teaching. Where's the rest going? Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.